again. Welcome back to BuboniCon 2020, the virtual edition. Next up, a reading from our 2020 co-guest of honor and recent Hugo winner, Becky Chambers.
Hello. As mentioned, I'm Becky. Welcome to my home, and thank you for allowing me into yours. Today, I will be reading from The Galaxy and the Ground Within, which is a book that does not exist yet. It's the fourth and final installment of the Wayfarer series. It will be out in February. This chapter takes place early in the book. I'm in the middle of revisions right now, but this one's in good shape. So we'll just dive in. The ocean beach was as beautiful as it was every time. The sky above was the pale amethyst of noon. The water below lapped at the shimmering black sand with a tender, rhythmic caress. People of all species milled about, some napping, some swimming, some collecting shells. The beach was lively, but not raucous, peaceful without being dull. A place where a person had ample space to stretch one's own thoughts while still benefiting from the reassuring company of others at a distance. Rovig sat in the middle of the tableau, his abdominal legs folded properly beneath him, while his thoracic legs engaged with the serious business of finishing a lengthy breakfast. A variety of foods were spread across the table in front of him, all carefully selected from the Stacy that morning. He'd arranged a somewhat Andrisk-influenced spread. Grain crackers with snapfruit preserves, spicy fermented fungus paste rolled in fresh sabtesh, and a few choice slices of hot smoked river eel. This was an Ailewan edition, but it complemented the other offerings well. A bowl of tea tied the arrangement together, a delicate Laru blend, as it happened, plus a small glass of seagrass juice. The latter beverage was the only part of the meal that originated with Rovig's own species, and though he'd had many sorts of breakfasts on many different worlds, he still swore by that hard-shelled Quellan tradition of starting the morning with a cleansing shot of the stuff. Some habits he could never break. Rovig spread preserves onto the last of his crackers with a lower set of legs, while holding a fungus roll in the set nearest to his mouth. He nibbled as he watched a school of furfish jump playfully in the water beyond the waves. A breeze rustled in the sandy scrub a short distance behind him, and the sound of chorus beetles rose in accompaniment, their haunting song low and sweet. "Friend," Rovig said clearly. He angled his head toward the place where he knew the wall-box lay camouflaged. "Turn off the beetles." Friend chirped in acknowledgement from the speakers, and the chorus beetles ceased. Rovig liked beetles just fine, but today he wanted something else, something... "Play relaxation mix number 6, he said, on random. Friend chirped again, and the music began to play. "That's better," Rovig said. He continued to eat, humming softly as he chewed. "How long until descent?" 20 minutes, Friend replied. Rovig flexed his abdominal plates in mild surprise. "Is that all? Well," he looked down at the last of the morning treats. "Damn." He thought briefly about bolting the remainder of his meal, but eating food without savoring it was almost as bad as throwing it out. He gathered the remnants with care, drank the seagrass juice with an appreciative shudder, and got to his feet. "Friend, please continue music playback throughout the main sound system." He gestured at a panel, and the beach disappeared, leaving only projection hardware and smooth walls in its stead. He passed through the doors and into the hallways of his ship. The Korrigach Krut had been Rovig's shuttle for standards, and he loved it well. It wasn't his home. That he had left back on Chalice, a charming little dwelling built into a cliff overlooking the city center. But space travel suited him best when embarked upon in a ship that felt like home, and he had decorated the interior of his own accordingly. There was not a wall outside the engine core that didn't have art hanging from it. There were abstract Andrisk paintings, Ailewan color opera masks, exquisite baubles made of Harmagian glass, some gifts, some memories, some passing fancies stumbled upon during a marketplace stroll. He patted a human-made landscape painting with a leg as he walked into the kitchen. He was particularly fond of that piece. He packed away his leftovers with meticulous care, placing them on stasis shelves just so, then headed for the control room, still humming along to the music that followed. The planet Gora dominated the view screen. He'd not abandoned his breakfast a moment too soon. He'd never traveled by way of Gora before, and his first impression was of a very orderly mess. The other transit hubs he'd been through were all situated around living planetary systems, where life happened down on the ground and traffic stuck to the orbiters above. But here, where the planet served no other purpose than to cater to the temporary needs of those in passing, where every dome was individually owned and the only shared territory were the traffic lanes guiding ships to and fro, everything smacked of utilitarian artificiality. There were no seas, no forests, no great cities. This was a place to be used, not lived in. Rovig's compound eyes were capable of tracking many objects in motion at once, but even he struggled to parse the scene before him. The open space he flew through was thick with ships of all sorts. Sleek cruisers with polished white hulls, colorful teardrops made for going fast and looking good doing it, hefty haulers fat with cargo, luxurious vacation skiffs, cheap ride depods, and shuttles that appeared held together with nothing but a welding torch and hope. The vessels moved as though they were following a pheromone trail, each marching along, one after the next, docking here and turning there, waiting patiently in the wormhole queue for their turn to hop through the space between space. Heavy as the traffic was, Rovig took comfort in the tidy streams of ships and the calculated rows of buoys. Rovig liked space travel just fine, and he rather relished any opportunity to take his shuttle out for a few 10 days, but he didn't do it particularly often. Space was not his life. He wasn't the sort to enjoy an unplotted jaunt through the off-road sections of the galactic map, and he certainly didn't like landing in places where travel law was treated as more of a suggestion than a rule, especially not given the course he was on now. The task at hand was fraught enough without adding traffic violations to the mix. In the interest of time, I am skipping just a little bit ahead. We are jumping over Rovig's successful descent down to the Goran surface. The ship began to slow, and the world along with it. The shuttle coasted to its destination, landing as comfortably as one could. The view outside was pretty much what one would expect in such a place. A circular tarmac outside a modestly sized habitat dome. An airlock tunnel connected dome to landing pad, its 6 universal latching ports branching outwards like airways. As Friend nudged the ship into docking position, Rovig glanced idly at the other shuttles he now neighbored. One looked both military and Aloan, white as a child's shell, smooth as wet ceramic, its heavy hull ready to take a beating. It was in excellent condition and a feast for the eyes. He'd never encountered an Aloan vessel that appeared otherwise. The other 2 ships looked like the sort of prefab kits that anybody with a modest budget could pick up at a multi-species dealer, but that was where their similarity ended. One obviously belonged to the ground host, as the exterior was painted unmissably with the phrase, "Visit the 5-hop one-stop," on every side. The other, well, it was a cheap ship, to be sure, and the longer he looked at it, the more it was clear there had been repairs involving components from other kits. It was mismatched and homely, but it wasn't falling apart, and the build didn't look dangerous. It simply looked like the efforts of someone who was doing what they could with what they had. For all his love of aesthetics, Rovig could respect that. Sometimes all you could do was make it work. There was a clank, a whir, a quieting down. "Docking is complete," Friend said. "You may safely exit the shuttle when ready." "Thank you, Friend," Rovig said, as the harness let him go. Stars, but he was ready to get out. He wasted no time in heading to the hatch, stepping through the airlock, standing patiently as he was scanned for contaminants, and going on through. Awaiting him at the airlock entrance was a Laru, a large child, too young to have chosen a gender yet, comprised of angles that didn't look comfortable and feet that didn't match their body. Their fur looked halfway groomed and was too long for their face. It hung listlessly over their large black eyes in a helpless manner that suggested it didn't know why it was still growing, but didn't know what else to do. "Welcome to the 5-hop one-stop," the Laru child recited in the flat tone of the unenthused. Ze stood on 3 legs, holding a scrib in the paw of Zer fourth. Ze looked at the screen, craning Zer limb-like neck. Ze looked then at Rovig, then back to the screen. then turned the scrib around so that Rovig might read his own shuttle license. It took Rovig a moment to realize this was the child's attempt to verify his identity. Apparently, this was what passed for docking security here. Yes, that's me, he said, hoping he was correct in his interpretation of whatever was going on. The Laru bobbed her long, shaggy neck in acknowledgement and holstered the scrib in the light satchel strapped across her back. She swung her head to the left and plodded along after it, leading Rovig inside without another word. A pair of doors slid open. The 5-hop one-stop lay beyond. The place was quaint, charming in a bucolic way. Rovig was not the sort to condescend about such things. Arrogance was a quality he strongly disliked, and he took care to dig it out of himself whenever he found it attempting to root. But he'd have been a liar if he'd said this establishment was his first choice. He'd hoped to stop over at the Resket Afternoon, a well-reviewed restaurant in Gora's southern hemisphere, but their dock had been fully booked, as had the Goran Sculpture Garden and the Harmagian Baths and the City Field. Much as Rovig would have liked a bit of a treat to ease the journey, the only thing that was truly necessary for him was fuel, and when it became clear that docking space on Gora was in high demand that day, he changed tactics and jumped on the first open reservation slot he could grab. He looked around, assessing just where that choice had taken him. Someone had worked hard on this place, someone who substituted love for money whenever the latter ran short. The circular space within the dome was home to a selection of fab-printed, bubble-shaped buildings of varied size, all painted in benign whites and grays, a palette clearly intended for the comfort of Aelons, who could grow fatigued from more colorful architecture that their species would interpret as yelling at them. The walking paths branching between the buildings looked hand-laid and were paved in a manner suitable for Harmagian carts. The filtered air was warm, warmer than a densely coated Laru would choose on Zerone, he assumed, but very comfortable by his own standards, managing to strike a considered compromise between his own Quellan preference for a soothing cloud of humidity and the Andrisk penchant for desert dryness. It wasn't perfect, but it would make most people happy. Rovig had the feeling that was the underlying aim with everything in this place. A sign hung over the entry pathway, and it was crammed with so many words and so many languages that the well-intended attempt at universal communication had rendered it nearly unreadable. The Telerain was grammatically jarring. He respected the effort, at least, so he skimmed through the clip instead. Welcome to the 5-hop one-stop, the little dome with a lot of options. Your ground host, Uli At Ulu, and your assistant ground host, Uli At Tupo. Beside this was a close-up picture of the ground host in question, both enthusiastically mugging for the camera. Tipo had to be the child Rovig followed now, for the little one in the portrait looked exactly like Zer, only half the size, twice as fluffy, and in a good mood. The overwhelming signage continued. Our rules. No weapons, no magnets, no bad times. This way, office and sundry shop. Certified travel permits, certified Imubot software upgrades, official GC Transit Authority map chips, souvenirs, gifts, and snacks. Host residence and life support /comms facilities, not open to guests. That way, fuel and fix-its, barreled algae, algae starters, photovoltaic repair, mech tech bits and bobs, no comp tech supplies on site, but we can courier them in. Also, the one and only Goran Natural History Museum. Don't miss it. Straight ahead, rest and relax during your layover at the 5-hop's world-famous multi-species bathhouse and flower garden. Fixtures and faucets for every sapient. Traditional Lara dessert offered free in the garden every day from 1400 to 1700. No bugs, no rain. It's better than outdoors. Just as Rovig was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the glut of exclamation points, their presumed wielder appeared in front of him. Laru were, to his eyes, a hilarious-looking species. He'd never say it to one of their faces, and he knew well that biological normality was extremely relative. He was sure he looked odd to plenty of people outside his own phenotype. But stars above, Laru were so floppy. Their limbs were like animated noodles, their stubby torsos thick and bumbling, their long tail-like necks somewhere between a nightmare and a grand cosmic joke. This Laru, Ulu, he assumed, had styled her fur in an explosion of intense curls that reminded him of nothing so much as the stacked rows of icing he'd once seen at a human bakery. She definitely looked to be the sort who would love a good exclamation point. Or 12. Rovig was proved correct, though the Laru's volume was directed not at him, but his young guide. To Poe, the older Laru scolded. The child visibly cringed. I thought I told you to restock the steam bath before Captain Tem got here. She pointed an angry paw at the middle path. Rovig saw enticing angled hedges down that way, and among them an Aeluan walking contemplatively, the owner of the fine shuttle, one would assume. The child exhaled from the depths of their lungs as though this were just one more injustice from a universe that existed only to conspire against her. You also said to be there for the 1306. He gestured at Rovig, who now found himself in the role of evidence in a trial he hadn't anticipated. If you'd gotten up earlier, you could have done both, the older Laru said. Go on. The younger voiced no further argument and marched past huffily, radiating annoyance. And trim your fur, Ulu called after her. She arched her neck in exasperation and swung her face toward Rovig. I'm so sorry about that. Puberty, you know. Ulu leaned in confidentially. Poor thing's quite uncomfortable, what with her teeth coming in. But that doesn't excuse... She craned her neck so that her head was facing fully over her back haunches, watching Poe plod off. Well, all the rest of it. She tutted at her as her head came back around. But just because these forgotten Zer manners doesn't mean I have. She beamed, bowing her neck low. Welcome to the Five-Hop One-Stop. I'm Ulu, and you must be Rovig. She hushed her voice discreetly. No honorific? No, he said, a quiet twinge accompanying the answer. The sting had mostly faded, but was always there. Ulu bowed her head again. We're very happy to have you, Rovig, she said, and this he appreciated. Quillen customarily were never addressed without an honorific. Exiles, however, were allowed none. The fact that Ulu both knew to inquire about it and to smoothly move on from the question showed courtesy and cultural savvy. Rovig forgave her a few of the exclamation points. Not all of them, but a few. And we'll leave it there.
Wow, thanks, Becky. Can you talk to us about what else you have coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, this book will be out in February. I also have the first of a pair of novellas in a brand new setting. These are my Monk and Robot books, the first of which is called A Psalm for the Wild Built, and it will be out later next year. So I've got two things coming out next year, very different flavors, and lots more stuff on the way.
How are things in your part of California? Are you having wildfires near you, or are you doing okay?
We're doing okay. We're doing okay. Not too close to us, so we're fairly safe in my neck of the literal woods. But it is something we've always got to be on our toes about.
So I have a question. Your panel, your reading is coming right after what would be our Writing 101 panel in the schedule, and you have created such a diverse universe. So what came first for you, the universe or that crew in that first book?
The characters came first, and the rest of it was largely built around them. There is a little bit of back and forth as I've worked with the series. Sometimes I'll be focused on characters, and then sometimes, a question will require a bit of world building first. But the characters definitely came first. Sissix was the first one that made it into my notebook, and the rest just kind of snowballed from there.
You mentioned this was the fourth Wayfarer's book, and of course it was originally published as a trilogy. So it was not published as a trilogy. People always say that. Me and my publisher never have. I always planned on at least 4. And this will be the last one. So I've made it to a nice even number. Yeah, I was thinking for some reason, I think there was the illusion it was a trilogy, and then you have a 4th book, so it kind of brings kind of a reflection of Douglas Adams with the 4th book, Hitchhiker's Trilogy.
Right.
And I think you had a little bit of that flavor in some ways in the first book, because you had a very
I mean, it's a serious story, but you had elements of humor in it, and very well balanced, I thought.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I think you know, I like to keep things. I mean, I don't keep everything light. You know, I'm not shy about getting into the tough stuff, but I think you know, it's nice to have a few different ingredients in there. It makes the tough stuff easier to swallow. So I'm glad to hear that worked well for you.
Were you surprised last year when you actually picked up the Hugo for Best Series?
Oh yeah, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I'm still pinching myself over it a little bit. Yeah, it was a tremendous honor and a huge surprise.
So, Record of a Spaceborne Few is my favorite of your books, and I think it's because you portray humanity so hopefully. I feel like I guess, you know, in these dire times, you know, what keeps your hope in humanity going?
Oh, that's a good question. I think just the people I know, honestly, and I think that's part of the reason I focus on stories that are very small in scale. In that, you know, it's very easy to look at the big picture and to not see that hope. You know, it's very easy to, you know, look at the news every day and feel like, you know, well, what chance do we have? These things are all too big. But the thing about people is that most folks are good and decent and want to do the right thing. That doesn't mean any of us are perfect and that we don't make mistakes or do bad things. But most people are good, and I firmly believe that. And I'm constantly proven right about that through the just everyday kindness of family and friends and strangers. And so that's why those are the stories I like to tell.
Well, thank you so much. This has been Becky Chambers, our 2020 co-guest of honor. And stay tuned for more BubonCon. And of course, we hope to see everybody in person next year. And we hope that we can get Becky to Albuquerque in 2022.
Yeah, hope to be there.